Hello out there, everybody. Manny here at Area 503. And I hope you all have been well since our last video. Today I want to talk to you guys about some declassified files that I've discovered on the FBI online vault. These files have actually been around for quite some time, at least as far back as 2010, but I only recently discovered them, so I figured I should go through them and show you some of the stuff that I found and tell you what I think about it. I went and downloaded all of these documents, and I've only just started to go through them. I mean, I've only scratched the surface of these files, but already I've discovered some very interesting things. So I'm going to talk about a couple of them today. However, as I get a chance to go through more of this information, I'm certain that I'm going to find more interesting topics, so keep your eyes peeled for a follow-up video sometime in the future. When I was first scanning through these documents, the very first thing that stood out to me was this SM-X, Security Matter-X. Aha! Security Matter X. This heading appeared on almost all of the documents. What does that make you all think of? Yeah, me too. But keep in mind, these documents are mostly dated 1947, 45 years before the X-Files television program. Well, that's a little strange. Anyhow, the first part of these documents describes a UFO sighting made in Oregon that was documented in the local newspaper, The Oregonian, on Thursday, July 3rd, 1947. I apologize for the poor condition of this document. However, the original was in terrible shape, and I did my best to clean this thing up so that we could get a good look at it. It wasn't easy. So this first report is missing its cover sheet, so we don't know who it's to, but judging by the context of the report, it appears to be a confidential report from a private citizen to the FBI. Such unsolicited reports were commonplace at the time, sadly. In the report, the informant describes an article in the Oregonian detailing the sighting of a UFO by a man named Dick Rankin. Dick is the brother of the famous aerial pilot Tex Rankin. And Dick Rankin was himself an accomplished pilot, having over 7,000 hours in the air. The Oregonian article stated that Dick was out sunbathing one day in his home in Bakersfield, California, when he looked up to see a strange UFO. He didn't think much of it at the time, but he did make note of it. Once local papers began running stories about the sighting, Rankin says he began to put some real thought into what he had seen that day, and he finally concluded that what he had seen was an XF5U-1, or Flying Flapjack. Take a look at this thing. This is a damned strange-looking aircraft. I mean, am I the only one who thinks that this thing looks like an extremely rudimentary hybrid of an airplane and a flying saucer? I mean, seriously. Anyhow, Rankin goes on the record explaining this UFO away as one of these test planes. Case closed. Only there's a few problems with that explanation for this sighting. First, this was the same year and month that President Truman signed the National Security Act of 1947. And for months prior to the signing of the act, the whole country was talking about it. And so I have to question as to how Dick Rankin came by his knowledge of an experimental test program that was occurring on the other side of the country. I mean, it's entirely possible that he was told about the program by another pilot, you know, in some kind of aviation rumor mill. But it seems highly unlikely given the current political state at the time, where secrecy was becoming the standard operating procedure. And there's one more little fact that completely discounts Rankin's theory. There was only one of these flying flapjacks ever produced, and that prototype had never left the state of Connecticut. And so, Rankin's statement that the UFOs that were seen over the Pacific Northwest were these test aircraft is completely and thoroughly debunked. So, what did they all see? A UFO, that's what. And it wasn't just one UFO. A man by the name of Kenneth Arnold also spotted the UFOs and clocked them at over 1,200 miles per hour over the state of Washington. If that speed is to be trusted, this is significant because it wasn't until later that year that the legendary test pilot Chuck Yeager would break the sound barrier for the first time. A third witness by the name of Jack Hayes also spotted the fleet of UFOs quickly moving over Astoria, Oregon. And a fourth witness spotted them over Fort Stevens not far away. However, both the Army stationed at Fort Stevens and the Coast Guard claimed they had never seen the UFOs. How bizarre. You think if they had seen them, they would tell us?
No chance.
Yeah, me either. Anyhow, today we know that Rankin's theory of this being a flying flapjack has been proven false. But it seems at the time somebody found some interest in this story because the next part of this file is the narrative of an interview of Dick Rankin made on July 30th by an FBI agent. And I want to point something out here. The FBI was more than willing to allow the public to believe Rankin's theory as published in the Oregonian. However, the FBI knew damn well that this was no test plane and they were interested in what it was. That's why they sent an agent out 3 weeks later to interview Rankin. And I'm glad that they did because in the interview with the FBI, Rankin is a little bit more forthcoming and gives us more details as to what he actually saw. Now we learn that Rankin actually saw 10 UFOs flying from south to north, and he estimated they were at about 8,500 feet and traveling at about 350 miles per hour. He said that they were in a W formation with one of the UFOs seeming to straggle at the end of the formation as if it was in distress and being helped along by the other UFOs. Rankin told the FBI that an hour later, the UFOs returned moving the opposite direction, only this time he counted 7 of the UFOs. The straggler and 2 of the other UFOs were missing from the formation. And then, the rest of Rankin's interview is missing from the file for some reason. I wonder what that could be. It seems pretty obvious to me that these things were not the XF-5U1 flying flapjack. And if the witness statement that these things were traveling at 1,200 miles per hour is accurate, then there is no way that these things were man-made. Remember, Chuck Yeager didn't break the sound barrier until later that year. So what does that leave us with? In my opinion, there was undoubtedly a fleet of UFOs over the Pacific Northwest back in '47. And if the authorities had not been so focused on lying to the public to cover this up, they could have instead focused their efforts on trying to determine what these things were. Instead, we will never know because even if the government did investigate this incident further, they have purged the information from the public record. And so again, on the topic of UFOs, we are left with a massive void of information, just like we were in the Roswell case. And this is what happens when you have shady government officials destroying records with zero accountability. It leaves us to speculate what truly happened back in 1947. The story of Dick Rankin and the fleet of UFOs spotted over the Pacific Northwest that day could end here, and it would be a phenomenal story. But the story of Dick Rankin and those sightings doesn't end here. In fact, the story gets a little bit scary at this point. Take a look at this next document. Here we have another Security Matter X FBI teletype marked urgent, addressed to the FBI director and the special agent in charge of the Seattle office. The document describes a phone call from a Mr. Ladd who had requested a report about the recent flying discs spotted over Portland. Assistant Director D.M. Ladd, or Mickey as he preferred to be called, was the number 3 person at the FBI at the time. Mr. Ladd had a long history in investigative work, having been a part of the takedown of notorious gangsters in the 1930s, and then acting as a Nazi spy hunter during World War II. Post-war, he set his sights on Soviet spies infiltrating the West. I'll talk a little bit more about Mr. Ladd later. But for now, let's just say that the fact that such a high-ranking FBI official is interested in this sighting tells me that this was definitely being taken seriously by the Bureau. So, Assistant Director Ladd requested an update on these UFO sightings, and we learned that not only was the FBI in town investigating, but there was also a reported conference of Army officials in Portland concerning flying discs. Somebody at the Oregonian reported that Captain William L. Davidson and Lieutenant Frank M. Brown of the 4th Army Airfield HQ in San Francisco were in Portland, and they had interviewed Dick Rankin, who we know reported the fleet of the 10 UFOs. We also learned that the Army investigators had interviewed 4 other experienced pilots who also saw the UFOs. At this point, once the FBI investigator found out that the Army Air Forces were also involved, for some reason they directly contacted Major General Nathan Twining at Wright Field in Ohio. Well, there's a name that sounds familiar. Major General Twining was deeply involved with the Roswell UFO incident barely a month before this. I spoke more about the Roswell UFO incident in my World UFO Day 2019 episode, so if you want some more information, go ahead and check that video out when you're done here. Here we are a month later, and the FBI investigator in a UFO case in Oregon is contacting this same high-ranking Army official. And the FBI agent says that they had gained the impression that the AAF had initiated this investigation to wash out the flying disc reports, since they are definitely not of AAF origin. So, there you have it, folks. The FBI agent spoke to General Twining. And Twining is about as high up as you can get in the government's UFO program at this point. Twining gave the impression that these UFOs were definitely not of our military. To me, that says a lot. It says that the government knows that these UFOs are not ours, and they are gravely concerned with finding out whose they are. All the while, attempting to mislead the public with blatantly false cover stories. Anyhow, let's move on to the next part, where we learn that on August 1st, the plane in which the AAF investigators, Captain Davidson and Lieutenant Brown were riding in, crashed in Kelso, Washington, and both of the investigators were killed. Wait a second. What? The 2 investigators were killed in a plane crash a few minutes after takeoff? Holy crap! I have to dig into this more. Check out this article I found dated April 19th, 2007. The article is titled B-25 Debris Found from 1947 Crack-Up of Plane Carrying Secret Cargo. In this article, we learn that the investigators were flying in a B-25 when shortly after takeoff, they had a fire in the left engine. And apparently the 2 investigators heroically piloted the B-25, allowing the other 2 passengers to escape using parachutes. And we also learned that the investigators were carrying parts from other suspected UFO sightings that they had collected in the area when they crashed. 60 years later, in 2007, a local man by the name of James Greer went up to the crash site and was poking around. He found some wreckage from the B-25 and a rock that may have been a piece of the UFO material that was on board the aircraft when it crashed. He turned the parts and the rock over to the Seattle Museum of Mysteries, where I assume they still reside today. But this article also tells us a little bit more about the plane crash. They were flying in a B-25 and the left engine caught fire. Davidson and Brown apparently went down with the plane, while the 3rd crewman and a passenger were able to parachute out to safety. Here's one more interesting point about this crash. The Aviation Archaeological Investigation and Research Site shows the crash report from 1947, and it has a blank squadron, as if this plane was unassigned or part of a secret program. The next document talks about the crash as well. This is yet another report addressed to A.D. Mickey Ladd, number 3 at the FBI. In this report, we learn that one of the pilots who was killed was actually a 4th Air Force HQ CIC officer. Really? Counterintelligence Corps? And he was on a top secret mission? Are you kidding me? What the hell is going on over there? We also learn that the CIC officer was either en route to or from an interview with someone, I assume Dick Rankin, who was the first one of these individuals to see these flying saucers and report them. And that actually verifies the previous documents that stated that these officers had interviewed Rankin before the FBI had arrived. And in the last part of the document, they tell us that the FBI was in contact with the Air Force's HQ, who had no idea what was going on, and referred them to a Colonel Blank in the 4th Air Force HQ in San Francisco. Now, I'm only guessing, but I suspect that Colonel Blank may have been a part of CIC as well. But I can't confirm that. But anyhow, the FBI was out there just doing its best to gather information on UFOs and give the public the impression that they were investigating them, when all the while they were just collecting information and turning it over to the Air Forces, as you can see in this document. Director Hoover was very short and to the point in this August 7th memo, telling the special agent in charge of the Detroit office to hand over all materials from a UFO crash to the Army Air Force Intelligence Service. And in this previous document, we see that the B-25 wreckage was screened by AAF intelligence from McCord. They didn't investigate the cause of the crash, they screened the wreckage. What does that even mean? Oh yeah, remember Assistant Director Mickey Ladd at the FBI? It turns out that 6 years after his retirement from the FBI, Ladd himself would perish in a crash of his own, an automobile crash. I wonder if the Air Force's intelligence screened that wreckage as well. I said earlier that this was reminding me of the X-Files. This investigation into the sightings by Dick Rankin and others back in 1947 has led me to this suspicious plane crash and the deaths of investigators, and a possible cover-up. It sure sounds like an X-Files episode to me. Well, I've spent a lot of time telling you what I think, and I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to me. Tell me what you think in the comments section below. And while you're down there, check out some of the links and read some of that source material for yourself. It's all down below, right next to the subscribe button. Hint, hint. Well guys, for now, that's all I have on the Dick Rankin UFO sightings and this crazy plane crash that killed 2 Air Force officers. I look forward to hearing what you guys think about all this.
As always, this has been Manny at Area 503, and I wish you all the best until we meet again. And I am out of here to continue my search for universal truth.